Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. For those of you that might be new to this format, this is a live Q&A. So our current and alumni families of our Evoke program are given the invitation to come in live and to submit questions as the broadcast proceeds. We collect those and I answer them in the order that they're received. You can always send in pre-submitted questions, no matter who you are, by emailing webinar@evoketherapy.com. Those questions go at the top of the queue, so I'll get to those first before I get to the ones that are submitted live for this evening, and we'll take it from there. You provide the content, and I'll do my best to speak to it. So let's get to the first pre-submitted question of the evening. Somebody writes, Part 1. So I listened with empathy and understanding, and my 14-year-old son opened up about his motives, hurts, conflicting parts of self. He also lied, manipulated, stole, disrespected me and others. I understand his side and know that another side exists. Part 2, I guess that all I can do is make boundaries that feel good to me and enforce them. So when we talk, he can choose to lie. It has its own effects on things. We've agreed to walk at night a few times a week. Maybe he'll lie at the start, maybe open up later. In any case, I can really only listen. Maybe I'll glimpse the story beneath the story. Is there more that I can do? There's a few concepts or ideas in this question that I want to get to. First of all, I really like, strange as this sounds, I really like what appears to be a patience with his being forthright and honest and transparent about things. Children need their dignity. They have to preserve their dignity. And a lie is a defense, right? It's a defense against a perceived and anticipated threat. So I always tell parents, it's okay to have a crystal ball. It's okay to have x-ray vision, if you will. But you can't always use it, and you can't always expose the child. You can let your knowledge, your skepticism, your ability to kind of see through things, you can use that for sure to make all of your decisions, to set all of your boundaries, to inform all of your responses. But be careful about kind of forcing them out of the closet. You can gently challenge them at times, of course. You can do anything you want, for that matter. But what you're showing here is a patience. And I love this question because you're showing our audience, our listeners, that it's a process. I think I've said this recently a few times, one of the greatest barriers to self work, to working on yourself, to improving relationships, improving your mental health, is the pace of things. We expect, because of how quickly things move in the world, we expect things to be kind of a quick fix, a hack, if you will. Somehow the therapist is going to give us a shortcut. And the fact of the matter is that there are no shortcuts to this kind of work. So most of what I want to do with your question is compliment you and say that it sounds like you're on the right track. I think, in addition to what you're already doing, which I probably wouldn't even say anything except for the fact that you asked, is to talk about your own issues, the ones that you feel comfortable with and that you've sorted out to some degree. I wouldn't say ask your child to contain you or hold space for you. But I use this example. When children are talking about or struggling with peer pressure in our program or at home, one of the techniques I encourage parents to use is to empathize with peer pressure. I think as parents, we complain about adolescents and their susceptibility to peer pressure. And the fact of the matter is, um, part of that energy we have toward them is our own displaced insecurities, our own displaced susceptibility to peer pressure. We worry about what the neighbors think. We worry about what people think if they find out one of our children is in a treatment program, right? We have those concerns. We worry about what people think about us at the grocery store if one of our small children is throwing a tantrum. We're worried about being judged. And I'm not immune to that either. I think I even have a special sensitivity to it because I'm a parenting therapist. I'm a parenting expert. And so I'm always kind of aware of the fact that people are watching me with extra focus and seeing what I do. So what I encourage parents to do is share your issues with peer pressure. Share how you still, to this day, at times, Worry about what the neighbors or the Joneses, your extended family, think about you. And what you'll find is the child will give you the lecture on peer pressure. But telling a child, for example, and I'm just using this example, telling a child that they have to find self-esteem from the inside, that they can't really rely on what other people think about them. They have to focus on how they feel about themselves. That's an old lecture that we've all heard, but it doesn't move the needle. So, with that example, talk about your own struggles with being forthcoming, if you can, if you feel comfortable enough, if it doesn't feel vulnerable or too sensitive to you. Talk about, in your life, how you struggled with being transparent with people, and how sometimes you acknowledge that you'll lie or stretch the truth to manage how other people feel or what they think or how they respond. You're doing a lot at setting a tone where the child's nervous system is relaxed. And that's really what I hear throughout your question, is you're taking the long approach, and you're acknowledging that it takes some groundwork. There are no hacks and no quick fixes to this, and you're on the right track. I would encourage some self-disclosure and some vulnerability to kind of add to that. But for the most part, there's nothing that you're saying that I think has any holes in it. And I like the patience. I found, because I was always the hammer to my children's nail, to my two older children who are now 28 and 30 years old, because I always kind of took that role and thought I could control the outcome, and I could engineer and mold them into the good, healthy citizens that I thought they needed to be. Right? That was my thinking going into this. I was earnest, but I was controlling. And so I often cornered my children. I'd worked with adolescents for so long that by the time my children became pre-adolescents and adolescents, I was ready to shift into interrogation mode. And one time when I was sharing some version of this with my therapist is when she taught me this idea that children need their dignity. And I realized we all need our dignity. I've said this to my wife lately, if I'm feeling defensive, to kind of put me in a corner and then shine the light in my eyes and ask me to come clean with some motive that I'm not admitting to, some motive beneath the sarcasm or the joke or whatever it is that she's trying to pin me on. That feels really, really threatening and really, really unsafe. I'm not feeling secure in that moment. And children are just like us in a lot of ways. I love what Rudolf Dreiker says. He's a therapist, a psychologist. And he says the proper way of treating a child is the proper way of treating another human being. There's more in common, folks. There's more in common with the way we treat our friends and our colleagues and our siblings, our clients, whoever it might be. There's more in common with that sensibility and parenting than we imagine. And really what children need to feel is safety. So whatever you could do to encourage that safety. Even I remember the first time that I consciously didn't call one of my children on an obvious lie. And I'll tell you, it had a dramatic and almost immediate effect on the child, how they felt, and how they saw me in our relationship. And I continue to try to do that. I slip again back into the old modes, but being patient with them, letting, I tell parents all the time, even the stuff that I teach you guys or the stuff that you read, this is for you, not to be repeated. You don't get to, well, you again, like I said earlier, you get to do anything you want, but in this way of thinking, it's not appropriate or advised that you take information, take your knowledge, your X-ray vision, and expose them. Pull back the curtain without their permission, but let it inform you. Let it inform you, but you have to keep it inside to a large degree, because when you share it, Dr. Reedy says this, or I read this in a book, or this is what the research tells us. All you're doing is just proving that you have to be right. It really proves a lack of confidence and more insecurity, because you're trying to establish your credibility, your authority with the child. So thank you for that question. Next question that comes in says this: my son is 18 and struggling to graduate high school. He has ADHD and has stopped his medicine, but some of his issues is just doing the work. We only intervene by asking for help at school if we ask him if he wants me to. We know he wants to be in charge of his own life, but at the same time, we want to help him if we can. Any advice on offering help to an oppositional 18-year-old child without getting in his circle? I'm asking because he struggles with executive functioning and seeing the future, yet he is a tough guy who knows exactly what he is doing. How do you balance helping your child without overstepping? I find myself trying to stay out of things so he can figure things out. But also struggling to show up to him that I care about him and would help him if he wanted. He is reactive, so it's hard, and I can stay out of things, but sometimes I check in. So there's a lot there. First of all, he's less tough than I think you might imagine. He's more vulnerable and scared and insecure. He's more conflicted about his own identity, his own capacity, his own ability. So, and I'm just feeling that in the language that you're using about his lack of coachability and how sensitive he can be to your offerings, your support, your suggestions, your coaching. So he's really threatened and feeling unsafe. The second point that comes in with this story is, I said this, it's not because I know my story is an exception to the rule, but it's important because I think a lot of our kids in treatment, our kids that are in therapy and in programs, are exceptions to the rule, don't fit in the round holes, if you will, the square pegs that they are. I dropped out of high school, and I eventually went back and got my high school diploma, and I started college when I was 21. Graduated in 3 years with straight A's, and then on to graduate school. So I didn't follow the normal course of trajectory. And I know the first thing that people say when I tell my story, if I refer to Steve Jobs or anything like anybody like that who dropped out of college, they say, well, that's the exception. I'm with you. I value education. I've said this many times. But there's something more fundamental and important in your child's development. That is him becoming a self. There used to be an old commercial. I haven't shared this example years ago, but it just hit me as I was speaking. There was an old commercial where a young child was trying to get the attention of his father, and the father was reading a newspaper. So that gives you an idea about how old this commercial was. It was when I was a child. And at one point, out of frustration of being pestered by his young son, the father tore off a page of the newspaper where there was a picture, a globe, a map of the world. And he tore it into pieces, and he said to his son, he said, when you put this together, this puzzle I've made for you, then I'll stop reading the newspaper and I will get help. I'll be with you. I'll spend time with you. And after just a moment, the young man came back with the completed puzzle and to show his father. And his father said, how did you do it so quickly? And it's a clever little commercial. The little boy said, on the back of the picture was a picture of a family. And all I did was put that together. And once I put that together, the world just kind of fell into place. I know it's just a sweet little sappy commercial. But part of this is asking us to shift our priorities, our agendas, our ideas about the way that the road is supposed to go, right? The way that things are supposed to go. We say things like our children are off track, right? Or we're on this crazy, painful detour. Well, the fact of the matter for our children, including my children, the detour is the path, is the track. I was saying just last night, reflecting on my own childhood and education and starting college, I wouldn't have it any other way. It was an important part of my development. So if we, mom and dad, that includes me, if we can learn to relax our own nervous system, if we can learn to do battle with the fear and anxiety that we feel that things just might not work out, if we can attend to that, if we can be nurturing to ourselves and own our own anxiety, we can show up in the relationship with our children in ways that don't trigger their anxiety, that don't trigger their defenses. We can hold lightly our grip upon them and their life and our ideas about what should be. I say on these broadcasts is more often than not examples where I make mistakes and struggle in areas, and that's all true. One of the areas that I have some pride in as a father of something I have accomplished, and by no means is it approaching perfection, but I've made an effort to see each of my four children and their needs and their trajectory very, very differently. And part of what has come out of that is four different paths, four very distinct and different gifts, and four very, very different individuals. One of the things I'm happy about is how different my children are from each other. And anything that I've done, my wife and I have done to contribute to that difference, that support of that difference. So it's not as scary as we think sometimes, or at least that fear and then anxiety becomes our enemy. It robs us of our creativity. It robs us of our executive functioning. I was watching a silly episode, or at least a silly scene in a new sitcom that was out about a therapist, and I don't want to even mention it by name because I'm not sold on it yet. I don't want to endorse it, but there's a story where a father who's a psychotherapist is trying in a certain moment to be a great dad, where his, I think she's 17-year old daughter confesses to him that she's had sex with the neighbor, and he becomes a caricature, throwing a tantrum, going crazy, becoming reactive, yelling at the neighbor, the parents of the boy that had sex with his daughter. And I remember thinking, it's over the top, it's kind of silly and ridiculous, but it demonstrates how, no matter how educated we are, and regardless of the fact that we've been in therapy and done our work a lot, we can get triggered. As Daniel Siegel, the renowned psychiatrist, explains, we can blow our top, lose our, blow our lid. The front top part of our brain can go offline in a moment of stress and threat, where we're operating from the reactive place, the emotional and raw place, the place that's supposed to get us from running away from a rattlesnake, jumping out of the way of a rattlesnake. But that's not our best decision. That's not our most grounded place to parent from. So part of what I'm trying to say is it's I used to say this all the time. I think what I'm teaching parents all the time is the lows aren't as low as you think, and the highs aren't as high as you think. I just spoke at my son's workplace, my 30-year-old son's workplace last week. They invited me to give a talk about mental health at his workplace. We did it at the arena where the Utah Jazz play basketball, and there's about 150 people there. And I was saying to them, when my son and his friends were teenagers, I thought all of them were delinquents and were going to end up just in horrible spaces in their lives. And now they virtually all are wonderful, not even young men with great values, with marriages, and in some cases children, and promising careers and a rich and full life. And part of the reason and my son was the one that went to treatment. You may recall, if you've listened to any of these broadcasts or watched any of these broadcasts, my son was the one that went to treatment. My son was the one who drank to the point of getting drunk in his middle school class. My son tried and experimented with everything, and now he's one of those people amongst his friends who's living an amazing and rich life for himself. So attend to your fear, attend to your anxiety. Free floating, disowned anxiety that we pin on or hang on our children is really, really destructive. The child ends up walking around that something is wrong with them. Our anxiety becomes eventually, it alchemizes into their critical inner voice. It really, really, really does. So it might not be as bad. Slow down, take your time, be willing to see alternatives. I've shared recently that I've taken a different approach with my 15-year-old daughter, who in some ways, is the most advanced of my four children. And I've taken my leverage and my focus, and my wife also, on school and grades, taking it almost to the point where there's very little pressure for her to accomplish or even succeed at all. And in this last year, after doing that, after making that shift, believing that it was the right thing to do for our family and for my daughter's development, it's been her best academic year. It's been coming from inside of her. And she talks regularly about going to college as if it's a given, which is not something she was saying 2 years ago, because part of the friction between us was her separating and becoming her own self, not being the subject or the object, better said, the object that I was manipulating and controlling and managing and engineering and molding. So relax, I guess, is what I'm suggesting or inviting. And slow down and know that the detours, the fact of the matter is, and again, I know what comes back to me is people saying that these are the exceptions, but over and over and over again, we have examples of some of the most successful people in all areas of life have been those that are late bloomers, those with learning differences. There was a movie, a documentary I saw a few years ago called it had the word greatness in it. It was like true greatness or talking about greatness. Wayne Gretzky. It was all about athletes. Wayne Gretzky. There was a soccer player. May have been Pele. Might have been somebody else. Jerry Rice. Players in their sport that were considered by many to be the greatest that have ever played the game. And one thing was common about all of them. They weren't the most physically talented. In fact, they all had limitations physically. And what made them great was the creativity that they had to employ to compensate for their differences. That's what made them the greatest of all time in that particular pursuit. It's the same story. When the fact that we imagine that we're off course is one of our issues. This is the course. This is the life. And if you embrace even this unwanted part of the journey, I imagine for nearly everybody who's listening, watching, I imagine if you're able to do that, you will also gain access to all the gold, all the wisdom that this part of the journey has to offer. In Search of Greatness is the name of the documentary. Thank you, Sarah. All right, next question. Somebody writes, part 1. My 20-year-old son attended a Vogue 3 years ago, followed by a therapeutic boarding school. Main issue was the use of marijuana, followed by all that it entails in the extreme. Because of this, there's been a lot of turmoil in our family that surely affected my younger son, 16 years old now. After treatment, the older son stayed in our family home during some periods of time, which ended up in more turmoil, including calls to the police. My 20-year-old now lives on his own in another state and seems to be doing well, supporting himself, working, taking online classes, and trying to get his life back in order. The brothers have pretty much no contact over the past few years. The 16-year-old thinks the older one is a loser, pothead, etc., and doesn't believe that he has changed. The older one has reached out to the younger one to try to reconnect with him, with no response from the younger one. Any advice or recommendation on how and whether to facilitate them reconnecting? Is there anything I can do to facilitate this? I think it would be great for both of them to have each other in their lives. They're the only two siblings, and we have a very small family. Mom and Dad won't live forever, so the two of them is all they got. Much thanks. Great question. I've had some of the same kinds of challenges myself with my children. For the most part, I think, especially as the children grow up into young adulthood like yours have, is to stay on your side of the street as much as possible, to not intervene. The one thing I would say to the older brother, it's not exactly the same, but I had a very similar experience with my younger brother, who was 2 years younger than me. I was a bully in various ways to him. Physically at times, emotionally at times. I was a bully to him. I had an older brother, and I passed down what I got from my older brother to my younger brother. In fact, in some ways, my two brothers, the older and the younger, kind of were pitted against me at times because I was especially problematic. At any rate, and then later on in young adulthood, I matured some, and I tried to have a relationship with my younger brother, and I tried to force it. Again, I tried to rush it. I believed that I had changed, and I kind of expected that he would recognize that I was a child back then, that I should be forgiven is what I thought, and that we should just move on. And he wasn't having any of it. And it took me a little while to figure out that, again, I was going to have to be patient. I was going to have to be quiet. I was going to have to be non-demanding. I was going to have to take whatever little contact and social reciprocity that he offered me. And that was the thing that earned my trust back. See, the act of controlling the younger child, being the older brother and controlling the younger child, bullying them, making them feel less than, alienating them from social experiences and so forth, whatever it was, creating chaos like your 20-year-old has or has done with the 16-year-old. If you come in hot trying to fix it, it's the same energy. It's still about being in control. So I had to let go. I had to give space. Today, at 55 years old, my brother being 53, I consider my brother my dearest friend. And he considers me the same. We're extraordinarily close. Probably the person outside of my immediate family, my wife and children, that I absolutely trust the most with my heart, with my life, with anything. And he would say much the same thing. We have a very warm and connected relationship. But I had to learn in those years of repair to be patient, to not force it, to not control it. As a father, I've been accused by my children of not protecting one from the other at times with bullying, and I'm guilty of that, for sure. And having said that, as they get older, it's their job to kind of figure it's their life. It's their lives. And it would be sad if, like you said, they're the only two that they have. You have a small family. It'd be sad if there wasn't an opportunity for them to stay connected, to be connected later in life. For sure, that would be a loss. I know. But it can't come from your energy and your motivation. So if anything, it would be coaching the older brother. I suppose if I were coaching you, what could you try? It would be coaching the older brother to be patient. See, forgiveness comes on the terms of the person who's hurt, not the person who did the hurting. So when anyone demands that we forgive them, that they present an apology to us, and there's some kind of overt or implied demand that we forgive them, it's the same energy that was the abuse in the first place. The same thing is true in therapy, in the sense that if somebody has experienced trauma, which everybody has to some degree, large or small, I can't dictate the course of treatment to that person healing. Because the one thing inherent in all trauma, even with your 16-year-old, the thing that is present in virtually all trauma is the loss of control. And so part of him not forgiving, part of him having his wall up is a symptom of what happened to him. That's his way of maintaining control and sovereignty over himself. And if people come into his life, his brother, you, anybody, and try to get him to tear down that wall or to take away a brick or two from the top of that wall, he's going to experience it as at an unconscious level of continued abuse, continued control and coercion, a lack of respect for him and his sovereignty. So patience. Patience is the key. That's the word of the night, patience. I want to read this quote to you because it came up during our last one. It was said so strongly the other night that I was almost afraid to share it on my social media, but I did. I got thinking about it with the last couple of questions, and so I'm just going to read it. Somebody wrote on social media, you are not responsible for your parents' emotions. You are not responsible for their reactions to boundaries you place. Of course, this is talking about adults. You are not responsible to make them understand you choosing a different life than they did. You are responsible to live in a way that helps you feel whole. I don't think we acknowledge as much as we could, and I say this in different ways, that the child isn't supposed to live the life to make us happy. That is actually the disease. That's the poison, not the cure. And a lot of parents, they have this fantasy, this kind of this inflated ego that they think they know all the answers, right? And that if they could just impart all of those answers to the child, then the child will grow up well. I love the quote by a teacher that I heard speak one time that said, when you have a child, it's not time to impart to them all of the lessons of life that you've learned. It's time to learn from them about life. The child is the teacher, and we are the student to a in a real sense, to a large degree. And that is less satisfying. That doesn't feel as good. That doesn't feed us on a daily basis to be the student, to realize that it's not our job, our child's job to please us, to make us happy, to live the life that we think that they ought to live. But it is absolutely fundamentally critical to the mental health of all involved. I cannot say it too emphatically. What I'm talking about right now is you have your boundaries, you have your truth. You get to express it, draw the lines where you want to draw the line. You have that right. I would support you 1,000 times out of 1,000. And eventually the child gets the same rights. Eventually, if our children are to love us, if we are to love them, if we're to love anybody or to be loved by anybody, it can't be from being compelled, from obligation. It can't be a duty. Then it's just ego. Then it's not love. Then it's just about being a good person instead of a genuine, deep, soulful expression of connection and safety and appreciation. So I just wanted to share that quote because I think it was so strongly worded. And like I said, I was a little afraid to even share it because of how strongly worded it was, but it's the truth. And it's one of the things that separates Evoke therapy programs, all of our programming, from virtually all the other programs that are out there dealing with teens and young adults, is that this particular truth that I'm teaching you right now is a core part of our philosophy, and it's based on the science about what we know about child development, about human development, about the human psyche. So thought I would share that. Next question comes in, part 1. What are your thoughts surrounding THC during THC drug testing for a just turning 18-year-old moving back home from therapeutic boarding school? Part 2, what are your recommendations for how to handle lending family car when the same 18-year-old may be using THC recreationally after moving back home? I'll take these, they kind of relate, so I'll take them one at a time, but one will kind of bleed into the other. At some point in our recovery from codependency, in our recovery from our own wounding, our own programming, if you will, we turn the child's life over to them. I've moved on this issue. I've become more liberal on this issue as I've gotten older, and I've seen success with that liberal movement. However, you get to have boundaries around what happens in your house. You get to have boundaries, especially if you're providing finances or support or a car or a vehicle that if they're willing to smoke and get high and drive, I've not moved on that at all in my life. In fact, if anything, I've become more precise and exacting on that. You get to have your boundaries. So part of it is you have to be on your own spiritual journey and figure out where you stop and where they start. You have to figure out what your responsibility is in the relationship and what it's not. I can't impose that on you. When my children were turning 18, and I've had 3 now that have turned 18, or a couple years off from the last one turning 18, I started to give them some freedoms, some pretty significant freedoms around 17 and a half. So far, the older 3 have all gone to college, and the 4th one, like I said, is talking as if she's going to go. And so I realized, there's a moment when they're your children in the home, and the next day they're not. I remember my daughter told me that one of the difficult parts of her first year in college was how all of her friends were drinking so heavily all the time, getting out of control, and how she was made to take care of them, or put in a position where she had to be the designated driver, so to speak, even if they weren't driving a car, but for the evening. And I think part of that can be failure is important. Our children need to fail. We need to tolerate failure. We need to give them opportunities. So I can't tell you where to draw the line around THC and drug testing. I can tell you the answer is found in your own codependency or your recovery from codependency. I can tell you that if it triggers you, if it bothers you, if you're not okay with it, that's enough for me. That's enough for me. There's this energy, this idea in our family that if anyone ever feels backed into a corner about a boundary or a decision that they're making, and nobody gets really backed into a corner these days, but if anybody gets questioned about a boundary or a decision, a preference, and somebody in our family, the person in question will in our family just say, well, that's what I feel good about. That's what I feel comfortable with. And in our family, that's a signal that there's no argument anymore. Again, I'm not talking about boundaries with my 15-year-old. I'm talking about with my adult children. And some with my 15-year-old for sure. But of course, I have more responsibility and I have a role with my 15-year-old that I don't with my 28-year-old, my 20-year-old, and my 20 and my 30-year-old. So find out what your codependencies, what it's about, where you are with it. Find out if you're trying to control them or if you're just trying to manage. If the decision comes out of the place of this is what you feel comfortable with, I won't argue with your line in the sand, wherever you draw it. If it comes from a place that you're trying to engineer a boundary so that your child is not addicted, I will tell you, you're in it with them. You're in the cycle of codependency and addiction. I've learned this. We can't, and I thought I could. I really thought I could. We cannot control our children's addictions. All we can do is work on ourselves. Right? Ram Dass said it. The only thing you can do for me is work on yourself. The only thing I can do for you is work on myself. So that is the work, mom and dad, or husband and wife, or wife and wife, husband and husband, friend and friend, colleague, sibling, even child, even if you're the child with your parent. You get to decide. That's the big shift and Evoke's model from other models is we're not going to give you this point by point plan that if you follow everything will turn out right. That's crazy. That's by definition mentally ill thinking. We're going to help you become a more whole person yourself. We're going to help you look at your background. We're going to help you look at the things you were taught about boundaries and identity and relationship and the parent-child relationship that were flawed, that had flaws in them. And then from a more healed and aware and conscious place, you're going to make the decision and we're going to support it 100%. At least that's my hope. That's my hope. So, yeah, I personally, if people in my life are using substances and operating a vehicle, I will have nothing to do with that behavior. If somebody's experimenting, my line is dependent upon how much it's affecting my life, my family, my 15-year-old. and it's personal. And I have built up some tolerance to allow for mistakes and setbacks. And what I know about that tolerance that I have, I'm more tolerant at 55 than I was at 25 by a long, long shot. And part of it is because of the mistakes that I've made in life. And I know what I need when I make mistakes and I get myself in a hole. And I need compassion. I need non-judgment. I need love. And when I have been offered those things, or as I've been offered those things, those have been the healing balm for my recovery, my healing. So it's difficult. It's difficult. And you have to find what works for you. You have to find out what triggers you, what robs you of your serenity. Because ultimately, you are responsible for your serenity, your peace of mind. They are not. It is not their job, and don't put it on them. It is your job. So thank you. These are great questions. Somebody asks this next question. My son just arrived in Utah last week, but curious as to know the difference between the philosophy between nomadic wilderness programs and those that use base camps instead. I think the philosophy can be very similar. I mean, there's probably more differences in what I'm teaching you tonight between our model and other models than anywhere else. It shows up anywhere else. But the nomadic model says that the context of moving from point A to point B in a given day, and all that goes on with camping and organization and chores and responsibilities and working together as a team, all of that, it becomes grist for the mill. The base camp models really came out of the idea that I think people were uncomfortable with that much wilderness living. Some states have had that legislated as part of their laws. But I've never heard someone to this day, I've never heard a professional who works at a base camp model tell me they think it's better. In fact, I've heard just the opposite. There's something about wilderness living. I just heard from somebody that there's something called the forest school. I think it's called that. Somebody I know, a friend of mine, saying that their grandson is going at preschool age, is going to go to this school that's outdoors the entire time, even in the winter in the Northeast. I think that's profound and illustrates, I think, how distorted we've come to think about nature. You know, I read a book and did a review on it a few weeks ago called The Comfort Crisis. If you're listening to this and this is your question also, or you're the one who wrote the question, I would encourage you to go back and listen to The Comfort Crisis. I would encourage you to read it or listen to the audiobook. It is a great book that talks about being put in stressful, difficult situations that really, really test and build up our mettle, our resiliency. I've shared with you before that NASA uses primitive living wilderness therapy for its astronaut teams if they haven't worked together to build trust, to improve communication. They find that anything that looks contrived is less effective. Team building exercises, for example. So the nomadic model is just the purest one. The others are mostly out of convenience and to placate people who have an aversion to the discomfort of the nomadic model. But I've never heard a therapist, a professional, in our private conversations talk about that model as a better model. And I've heard them say just the opposite, that they really appreciate what the nomadic model does for the child, for the family, for the treatment, for the therapy. So, yeah, it's mostly just out of convenience and probably to attend to somebody's discomfort. Somebody writes, my child just started at Evoke. This is her first wilderness experience, but her fourth place of treatment over the last 7 months. You speak a lot about parents doing their work. What advice would you give to helping her younger sisters, 8 and 9 years old, to process what all is occurring? Gosh, 8 and 9, that's difficult. he might laugh at this. If you listen to a lot of these, you'll start to be able to predict what my answers would be. My first answer to this question would be, where I would intervene is with the parents. Being able to listen, to watch what the child is saying by their actions. To not make it better. To not try to put a shine on it or a bow on it. To let the children be confused, upset, sad, and to hold that space for them. Everybody has this experience as a parent at some point. If you have children, your child is playing outside, trips and falls, scrapes their knees, scrapes their elbows, their hands. And the first thing that they do, we all know this, the first thing that they do in most cases is they get up and they look at the parent. What they're doing is they're looking at the parent's face to decide how they feel, how much it hurts, how safe or injured or scared they should be. And that way the parent becomes the base of operations, psychologically speaking. And the child learns about themselves by the way the parent reacts to the world. If the parent believes that the world is an unsafe place, the child will believe that also. If the parent believes that people are innately good, the child will believe that also. In general, I'm speaking in generalizations, but that's the idea of attachment. So I would listen, ask questions, get curious. If, by the way, siblings wall themselves up, remember that wall is in part protection, getting control back. So when siblings say, I don't want to talk about the child away in treatment, or I'm just glad that they're gone, 8 and 9, they're probably not saying that. They're probably just missing them and confused. Just be with them. Be with their sadness. Show them that you can take in their sadness, metabolize it, and then reflect back a sense that it's okay, that you're not overwhelmed or too scared. You can even share that you're scared, but sharing you're scared in the right way is showing that you're confident, right? Because confident people talk about when they're scared. So my answer to the question is, you are the tool. You are the facilitator. That's why I do these broadcasts. That's why I started doing them 15 years ago in a few months, because I thought the amount of time I spent teaching parents to be the containers for their children's ongoing stress and sadness and grief and anger has more impact on the child than the hours I spend with the child by a large degree. So do your work. If you can go to an intensive, go to an intensive. Do it online if you can't do it in person. Go to go to Al-Anon. Go to Codependence Anonymous. Go to Families Anonymous. Go to adult children of alcoholics. Even if your parents don't identify as alcoholics, it's a place to go to learn about how family patterns, family trauma, family pathology, family generational issues, themes, patterns, and healing are passed from one generation to the next. Do that work, and you'll be the one capable of showing the child that the world is okay, that they're okay, and that they can feel sadness and grief and loss and hurt and pain, and that they'll be okay because you're okay, and you reflect that back to them. Thank you. It's tough. After listening to the next question, after listening to the transport or not to transport session, I continue to grapple with the fact that we were advised not to tell our daughter she was going to wilderness. She is now going on completing 5 weeks. She's making some progress, but she's angry with us for pulling her away without any information. How to work through this, because I do feel we could have done this differently. We were following advice, which we got, and I wasn't comfortable with then, and I still am not now. Just tell her you made a mistake. That's all. In a sense, just apologize and say, you're right, I was scared. I abdicated my responsibility to somebody else. Now, like I said in the broadcast, if you'd done it the other way, you only know the one way you did it, right? So if you did it the other way, you might be having a different reaction, a different problem, and a different challenge. And that goes back to the idea that I talk about all the time and that I talked about in that broadcast, which is you don't get to win, you get to choose how to lose, right? So it's okay to just say, I'm sorry. It makes sense that you're angry. I regret doing it that way. If I could go back and do it again, I would do it the other way. And I know that doesn't make it better, but I hear it. I'm taking in your anger. I'm allowing it to be. I'm not defending myself. I'm not trying to get you to get over it. You're allowed to be angry about it as long. I mean, it's not, I'm not giving you words to say. I rarely give you words to say. I give you examples of what it sounds like if you were to embody that energy, that idea, that sensibility. Does that make sense? It doesn't really work for therapists to give clients, or in this case, me to give parents a script or partners a script. But the reason I give examples of what to say is because I want you to know what it would sound like. And the answer is she gets to be mad at you. She gets to, as long as she wants. And you have nothing to do with that in the sense that it's not your job to control it. It's not your job for her to get over it or to try to get her to get over it. It's your job just to hear it, to be accountable for what you're accountable for. That if you think you made a mistake, apologize. And for those of you that think, well, I don't think I made a mistake. I'm just frustrated that she's angry or upset. If that's your situation, you're not See, confident people apologize. I was thinking about this today. A confident person sounds like, I'm sorry. You're right. I get it. I made a mistake. I could have done better. I fumbled. I dropped the ball. I messed up. That's what confidence sounds like. A lack of confidence or insecurity sounds like, it wasn't my intention. I had no choice. The experts tell me that this is the best way to do it, and I'm following the experts. Right? That's what non-confident people sound like. Confident people sound like, I'm sorry. Thanks for telling me. I get it. I'd feel the same way if I was you. And I have no energy, no investment in you getting over your anger. You're allowed to feel it as long as you want to. And you don't have to forgive me. That's what an adult does. That's what a grown-up does. That's what a parent who's taking on the responsibility of being a parent sounds like. The other one who's justifying and arguing and talking about intent and giving excuses and citing professionals and recruiting other people's opinions to prove that they were right and didn't make a mistake, that's the one who still hasn't quite grown up. And I do that sometimes. I haven't quite grown up all the way. And sometimes those insecurities leak out in those ways for me. And I teach this stuff every single day. And I still slip back into it, which is another opportunity to go back and apologize. I talk about this. There's in fact, I wonder if I have this. There is there's an old set of slides that I used to use. Here it is, I think. This is, I don't know if this will stop being blurry. It's blurry to me. I'll read it just because I can read it. If you're watching it, I'm sorry for how blurry it is. I don't know why it's doing that. This was a slide at the series of a bunch of instruction that I gave around boundaries. And at the very end on the last slide, this is what I say. I can read it because I know what it says. But if you're watching, you're probably thinking, how can you read this? Lastly, I wrote, lastly, we can say that we are sorry when we fail. Every parent has limits, and every child will discover the end of those limits. We can say we're sorry when we fall short of the ideal. And with this, the child learns perhaps the most important lesson of all, what it means to be human. That's really, I think, the responsibility, is to teach our children how to be human, how to be fallible and perfect human beings. You want them to be accountable? Model it. You want them to be able to say they're sorry and own up to things? Model it. There is by far no greater contribution to a child's development than when a parent is able to show their human side. Because that comes from the greatest strength. Because a parent who's afraid, who's under-evolved, underdeveloped, who's battling insecurities and their demons, their dragons still, that parent will try to be right. My daughter asked me, just to bring this full circle, my daughter asked me on a podcast a couple of years ago. Somebody suggested that I be interviewed on the podcast. And so my daughter and another somebody else that I trust kind of interviewed me together. And my daughter said, she asked an impromptu question during the interview. She said, what is the thing that you teach that you struggle most with? And I said, being right. Being right. That's why I talk about it so much. Because it's still the thing that I stumble over, that I trip over all the time. And part of it is because I was good at being right. You know, I was that kid that parents and adults said should be a lawyer. They didn't account for the fact that studying law would, for me, be torture. They just were commenting on the fact that I was a good debater. I was that kid. I had the verbal skills, the intellectual capacity to make a good argument. And I've used that strength, I guess you could say. It's become also my greatest weakness, as is the case usually. Our strengths and our weaknesses are right next to each other. Our wounds and our gifts lay down beside each other every day. All right, I got time for one more. Someone says, hi, I'm realizing how hard it is for me to be the soother and comforter for my child as opposed to the defender and explainer. I have to be so regulated and thoughtful and set my defenses aside. I'm afraid I can't do this as much as my child truly needs me. It is like my entire brain has to create new pathways. Any way you suggest to improve this skill rapidly? Folks, that comment/question is flawless. You're doing it. That's it. You're doing it. Every single thing you said in that question, that comment, that post is what it sounds like when somebody's healing. See, healthy, evolved, more enlightened people talk about how human they are, talk about their fallibilities, their mistakes, talk about their crazy thoughts and crazy reactions. And that's what they do. You're doing it. If they haven't heard you talk like that more. Find circles where other people are talking like that. That's it. That's gold. When I go to a good AA meeting or a good Al-Anon meeting, people are talking about their crazy brain, their monkey mind, their old reactions, their old patterns. This is what my brain tells me. This is my natural inclination. My wife and I are talking about that these days. Not how perfect we're getting, but how we realize more and more and more how we don't get it, how we still stumble, how all of this education, all of this training is wonderful, but it doesn't clean everything up. What you said in your post, your question, is exactly what I would look for in a client. If you were my client, I would sit across from you and I would just say to you, amazing. You're getting it. The part where you ask for improvement in this skill rapidly, that's the part that's a little bit off. There's no rapid path. The only rapid path is significant and severe trauma. Something horrible happening to you. And that I wouldn't wish on anybody. Something devastating. That sometimes can really accelerate our progress. But you're doing it. Just keep talking like that. Keep modeling that for your child. Keep being human like that. Go and listen to somebody who's enlightened. You will hear them talk about, inevitably, their faults and their failures on a regular basis. Contrast that with somebody who's smart, intelligent in some ways, but less enlightened. They will talk more about their giftedness, about what they've accomplished, about how good they are. When a parent comes to me and says, we're struggling, we make mistakes, we don't know what to do, I think, great. There's real hope here. Keep going. You're on the right path. When someone comes to me and says, we made some mistakes, but we're pretty good parents, our kid has really nothing to complain about, that's more difficult. That child and those parents are up against some bigger defenses. Your question is wonderful. Keep it up. Keep doing it. All right, folks. That's all for tonight. Get your camera ready. If you want to look at any of the web pages associated with these slides, you can shine your camera at the QR code and it will give you a choice to go to the respective web page associated with it. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, or if you're already in therapy and you want to do something that will accelerate your therapy, I cannot endorse Finding You, our therapeutic intensives. The next offering is April 19th in person or May 19th online. There's one spot left in our weekend in the UK, June 23rd through 25th. That's probably going to fill up real soon. If you've been to a Finding You, even to a Returning to You, anybody who's been to a Finding You is welcome to come back. And our Returning to You offering, our next available offering for that is October 11th through 15th. We also have custom intensives for couples called Finding Connection, and custom intensives for families called Finding Family. For questions to find out more, contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. If you are a current Wilderness family or an alumni, the next offering for a support group is March 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. If you are an alumni of our Wilderness Therapy program, we have one meeting a month for alumni of our Wilderness program, March 28th March 28th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering. If you are a coaching or an intensives client, April 11th is the next support group for you at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact Sarah D, SARAD, at evoketherapy.com for more information, or go to our website at evoketherapy.com/family involvement. If you want a coach who's trained in the attachment-based model, trained in the evoke model, who's maybe even been in the field, or who's worked at the intensive and knows what that work is like, we have a plethora of coaches available: clarifying boundaries, post-treatment, transitioning, individual coaching, co-parenting coaching, couples coaching, family coaching. Contact coaching@evoketherapy.com to find out about a good match for you. We ask all current parents to try and go to at least 6 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. Also, RefugeRecovery.org is a Buddhist-inspired program, less of an emphasis on a higher power. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness has chapters in your local communities that offer free support and resources. You can go to NAMI.org to find out more there. You can find all these broadcasts on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just go to that app and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. Subscribe, listen, and follow us there. Or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen from there. You can also go to our YouTube channel, Evoke's YouTube channel, and watch the rebroadcasts with the slides there. You can follow Evoke Therapy programs or me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy. You can also find Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has new content each week. If you want to give back to people that can't afford treatment or therapy, you can give to our 3 charitable partners: ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, or EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. You can earmark your donations, your tax deductible donations to these 501c3s. You can earmark them for an Evoke family or even for an intensive programming, which people have started to do. So it's wonderful. So those are our charitable partners. All right, folks, my next broadcast will be about 24 hours from now, 23 hours from now, to be more precise. I'll be talking about betrayal in relationships and boundaries. I could talk about boundaries every night, every broadcast, and there'd be more to talk about. So tomorrow evening, Wednesday, March 22nd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time on betrayal and boundaries. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up here and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow night. Take care. Bye-bye.